Director of Powerful Voices. So thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday morning to talk about none other than decolonizing philanthropy, because what else would you rather do on a Saturday? And I'm just really looking forward to everything that Aisha has planned for us today. She's worked really hard on this series, and for you all to be joining us on the first iteration of what this will blossom into is really a groundbreaking event for us as Powerful Voices. And I want to start by sharing a land and people acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on land that was stolen from the Duwamish and Coast Salish people, who are the true stewards of this land. We acknowledge the sacrifices of Indigenous Africans whose stolen labor was used to work this land. And we acknowledge immigrant communities whose contributions continue to deepen and diversify the cultural fabric of the nation that occupies this land. So some words that I wanted to share before we get into the fun and interesting stuff. We don't just show up for ourselves, we show up for all the lineages that brought us here. And that's something that I continue to remind myself of, especially during times like this when we're facing so many challenges at once, and specifically for us who are BIPOC folks. So I really want to take this moment to invite the BIPOC folks in this space to call into this space an ancestor or ancestors who inspire you to do the work that you do. And while folks maybe are thinking about who that person is or people are, I can go ahead and kick it off by naming my grandmother, Lindsay Ola Johnson, a very stylish, no nonsense, God-fearing Southern Black woman who cared so deeply for so many people that even her friends called her mama. So that's someone that I want to call into this space. I believe that she is someone who truly embodied what it means to be a philanthropist. Even in the sense that it wasn't always about her giving money. She raised a lot of children who weren't her own. She cared for so many people who needed some place to stay, someone to help them get back on their feet. And oftentimes these people would come back and revisit her just to say thank you because of everything that she gave. So when I think about philanthropy, you know, that's really the spirit that I try to embody. So yeah, would anyone else like to go next? You can just popcorn style it.
I'll go. I would like to call and share my mother, who taught me so much about love and giving, and who inspires the work that I do in ways that I am still learning about, and and in ways she inspires me to do things that she never got an opportunity to do, and give in ways that she never got an opportunity to. So I bring her into this space with me.
This is Lulu. Sorry, I have a little headache, so uh, my computer, my vision is off. Anyways, never mind. Obviously, so I would like to bring into space Mary Carpenter, my mother. I remember her walking on the street, and there was this woman that I didn't understand what she worked as, but I remember this now, you know, as we support sex workers. And my mom was crying, and I didn't understand why, because the woman had a child and she gave her money. And I was like, why did you give her money? And later on, I realized that it was a sex worker, right? And so I think my compassion for those and the stuff that I ended up doing come from her. Um, and then just want to give it up to Audre Lorde, because her books and words fill me every single day. I even quoted to my students the other day. They're fifth graders, and I was like, "Your silence will not protect you. Tell me what's going on." Not
I can go. Cheryl, she, her. And I'm calling in today my grandmother. I actually have a photo of her on my desk that I've kind of collaged. Her name is Gloria Fortune, and she is one of the most resilient people I've ever met. And she's just survived 2 wars and in the Philippines, and especially right now, reminds me that our community is resilient. And yeah, I'm bringing her into the space today.
Would anyone else like to go?
I'll go. My name is Erica Chen. I use she, her pronouns. I will call in my late father, who his name's Stephen Chen. He emigrated here from Taiwan when he was 4 and ended up becoming a firefighter and EMT, and just taught me a lot about caring for others and caring for the community.
Thank you. How about one more? All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone who shared. I just think it's an important practice to remind ourselves why we stay committed. And I just want to thank everyone for honoring the space that we're holding in solidarity with BIPOC communities throughout all of the different ways that we intersect with social justice, especially given all that we've been through in these past few weeks alone, with the white supremacist violence that stole the lives of 8 people, most of them Asian women, and the continued assault on Black and Indigenous communities. It's important to remind ourselves why we stay committed. And as powerful voices, at the core of the work that we do is about creating spaces for girls of color, for non-binary youth to be brave and to stand in their power and to ignite their abilities to confidently express themselves, regardless of whatever it is that life is throwing at them, and to build community, to build that sense of trust and camaraderie and belonging, and to act against injustices that affect their lives, because we need each other in solidarity in order to do that. And so I just want to thank you all for holding this space in the spirit of philanthropy. And I look forward to hearing a lot more about, why you're here and what you are looking forward to taking away from this experience. So with that being said, at this point, I will toss it over to our hostess with the mostest, Aisha, and she's going to take us all on a journey.
Wow, what an introduction. Thanks, Chimera. It's, so good to see you on a Saturday. You know what I mean? Extending that work week. So my name is Aisha. I am Powerful Voices, a donor relation manager. I joined the staff semi-recently, last July, and it's been just a super, super wonderful experience. So what else about me? I'm like, do I have any fun facts? I identify as a mixed Black person. I live alone in a pandemic, which means that I spend a lot of my time practicing my English accent, which I will not force you all to listen to, but I promise it's amazing. And I'm really just excited to be here with you all. We had a lot of folks really interested in coming today, and a lot of them weren't able to make this actual call, but we are recording today, and that will be sent out hopefully on Monday, and if not Monday, then some other time early next week. So that is just a housekeeping note that we will be recording. So if you don't want your face to be on the recording, please turn your camera off. And if you have any questions or problems that come up during our time together, you can just pop those in the chat and we'll try to address that. And then also that we'll just be going to around 12 p.m. We don't want to take all of your Saturdays away from you. We want to honor our time together. So those are just a couple quick things to get us started. So for today, our agenda is kind of simple. It's kind of a time to come together around our core definitions of philanthropy, of equity and community work, and kind of get at what we're all saying what we are all meaning when we say those things. So it's about defining those terms. It's about taking a brief look at what philanthropy has looked like in our past and in communities of color, and why it's been very problematic. And then also where we're at right now, and then in particular with this series, where we're hoping to go. So I'm excited to go into all of that more deeply with you guys. And this is definitely meant to be a conversation. So at any point, if there's something that's really resonating with you, we definitely encourage you to either pop it in the chat or to unmute, because this is definitely not meant to be a lecture. And as the oldest, sibling, I can definitely lecture. I've heard that so many times. It is a truth. So I'm just excited to get into this with you all. So to kind of start off, we want to go into kind of why reimagining philanthropy. Why do we think it's important, and kind of where did this emerge from? And like a lot of good ideas at Powerful Voices, it emerged from Chimera, and I having a conversation in Chimera, just sharing some really beautiful thoughts and ideas around how we can be more innovative and collaborative in our fundraising model. So the hope with this program is kind of to spark conversations throughout our communities around philanthropy, and to kind of push back against kind of what we've known as philanthropy, what's been the mainstream, to kind of push back against that, and to have an equity lens, a social justice lens, and a lens of centering Black and Brown folks and their communities, which, like Chimera mentioned earlier, is our whole mission. So that's kind of the goal of this whole program, and something that we're still building out and excited to learn from and be in community with you all. So this is not Powerful Voices giving kind of a recipe of how to reimagine philanthropy and how to be the perfect philanthropist in communities of color. It's really about just creating a space to have these conversations and work together. Oh yeah, no problem. Yes, this is hopefully gonna be about an hour and a half. It should end like around 12, depending on how long we're in breakout rooms and things. So I just wanted to start off with some key terms, because I know that all of us here have different levels of understanding when it comes to fundraising. I know some folks here are, like Cheryl, amazing fundraisers and community workers, and Cheryl could be teaching like whole university courses on this. But I also know some of us are kind of just starting out and learning about these things. So I just want to define a couple things right off the bat. But if there are questions that come up, terms that you're unfamiliar with, please feel free to pause me and ask me to clarify that. So first, I want to start with philanthropy versus fundraising. What are we trying to kind of get at when we're saying those? So once again, as someone in development, these conversations are really complicated. You can get really, really deep into what's a philanthropist, what is a fundraiser, what's a development worker. There is a lot of nuance. For the sake of simplicity, in this program, we are kind of using philanthropy as kind of a catch-all for giving that we're doing in our communities. So we're kind of using it just to mean all of these different things. And as our understanding grows and we continue to work on these terms, as a community, I'm sure our definitions will change and things like that. But in general, when folks are talking about philanthropy versus fundraising, philanthropy is having more of a focus on the giver, so the philanthropist, and fundraising is having more of a focus on gaining the revenue. So that's kind of a little bit of a difference, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to use philanthropy as a catch-all in the space. And then the second kind of term that kind of gets thrown around a lot and is not defined that often. I remember when I first heard this term, I was like, I can't even begin to understand what this is about, which is the nonprofit industrial complex, or NPIC for short. And basically what we're meaning when we say that is understanding that there's a system that funnels nonprofits and nonprofit workers towards a particular direction and limits a kind of scope of work that we're able to do. So that's really what the nonprofit industrial complex means. It means just understanding that there are norms and cultures and systems within the fundraising world that kind of funnel us all towards a particular direction. So clarifying that. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention before we get into it is the difference between nonprofits and foundations. A lot of the kind of norms that inform this nonprofit industrial complex are created by foundations and not necessarily the nonprofits. So when you kind of get into it, the difference between nonprofits and foundations can also get a little fuzzy and a little complicated. But basically it comes down to being tax deductible, right? So nonprofits have what is called a 501c3, I'm like forgetting the word, code, but basically it means that you can give us a donation and we can give you a tax receipt and you can get, you could get a tax write-off for that. Whereas a foundation is an organization in a similar way that a nonprofit is an organization, but a foundation is getting their revenue either primarily from a corporation, from a particular individual or a particular family, and they usually do not take donations because they cannot be tax deductible. So they're both organizations, usually have different missions and different impacts, and foundations usually fund nonprofits. So there's a give and a take between those two organizations, but they are separate and different things. So I just want to pause right there because I just threw out some definitions. How is that sitting with folks? Do people have alternative definitions that they really like? Or was there any confusion, anything at all about those first definitions? I'd love to hear some feedback.
This is Lulu, she, her. I don't know if it's relevant, but when I first heard the nonprofit industrial complex, and thanks for story sharing, I heard that it was like, it stopped the civil rights movement. It was like that it was intentional so that it could be more in control of the government, by the government, in regards to how we give. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, okay, so also thank you, Rebecca, for pointing that out. There are also in the nonprofit sector, like Lulu kind of just mentioned, there are different kinds of ways that the government directly involves itself with nonprofits. It can be through straight funding, and it can also be through different ways with foundations and policies around nonprofits and things. And Mary, just to go over that piece again. So when it kind of comes to the term nonprofit industrial complex, I think with these kind of definitions, it can get really big and very vague because it kind of encompasses a lot. But the main idea around it is that the nonprofit industrial complex, and industrial complex in general, just means that we are, as individuals, as members of nonprofits and as nonprofits themselves, are being funneled in a particular direction. So there's kind of systems and norms that are structured intentionally, like Lulu mentioned, none of these things happen by accident. They're intentionally structured to move us in a certain direction and kind of limit our scope in some way. And different people believe that is good or bad, but either way, there is that understanding that we are being kind of moved in a particular direction. Yeah, great. Thank you everyone who's commenting in the chat. I love hearing these things. And yeah, definitely feel free to pop any resources or articles that are coming up into the chat. And yeah, we have community-centric fundraising, who is based out of Seattle and who I love and who do amazing, amazing work. So I hope that y'all will check them out. And also on Monday, I'll forward some additional resources about that. But Lulu kind of made a great point, which kind of transitions us really, really perfectly into this next piece, which is giving a super, super brief, I don't even want to say a history, kind of an overview of what some impacts of philanthropy and nonprofit work have been in communities of color. And I'm a history major, and we all have like the same saying, which is that we have to know where we've been to know where we are and where we're going. If you've ever interacted with anyone who majored in history or anthropology, we all have the same like cheesy sayings. And but I think it's very true. We really do have to understand the context that kind of informed us to get here, because like Lulu was saying, I think like Chimera mentioned earlier, these things are not by accident. They were constructed and made in a particular way for particular reasons. So to kind of start way back, charitable organizations and folks kind of organizing around wanting to give back to their communities or be in solidarity with different communities has been around forever, right? The nonprofit structure hasn't been around forever, but people wanting to organize and give back to other folks has been around forever. And in America, we start to see the nonprofit system, getting itself together really at the advent of when the country was founded. So really, really early on, there are different Christian groups who start organizing and fundraising and doing political awareness as soon as the nation is kind of created, as a settler colonial state, but we don't have time to get into all that today. But where you really start to see what we would understand as a nonprofit really come into fruition is in the early 19th century. Rockefeller is one of the big guys who kind of started creating nonprofits. And then after World War II, the Ford Foundation also emerges and is another one of the big examples of how nonprofits begin to be structured. So if you follow the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, you'll see that they set a lot of the norms. They help build a lot of the policies around nonprofits. And you can kind of see a relationship between, the US government and Ford and Rockefeller building these norms and kind of starting to construct what would become the nonprofit industrial complex. So at the same time that these, very affluent white men are starting to construct these charitable organizations, and for me, anytime I am seeing very wealthy, rich white people with zero analysis start to do something under the guise of this is great for everyone, don't look too closely at it, I start to get a little suspicious. So we're seeing this happen. And at the same time, we see that communities of color have almost an immediate response and analysis being created to respond to these nonprofit organizations coming into their communities. And we can see also that kind of harm from these nonprofits happens almost immediately. And to give just one example, there is a sociologist named Carter G. Woodson, who I think many of us would be familiar with. He was an amazing educator and community worker in the 1930s and 40s and so on. And he kind of invented what would become the Black History Month, which we celebrated in the States last month. So he is kind of a giant in the field. He's, yeah, he did a lot of amazing things. And he has what is kind of what I would call like a quintessential experience with nonprofits. So he has this organization which is working to build curriculum and raise awareness around education in Black communities, and getting schools to teach Black history and what's going on in Black communities, which I'm sure we are all like, that is crazy that he's doing that in the 1930s. And that is something that educators are still really, really working towards, you know, in the 21st century for Black folks and Indigenous people and other people of color to have our history and our voices heard in education. But this has been kind of a struggle that's been happening since the dawn of time. So Carter G. Woodson has this amazing organization trying to, you know, increase awareness around education in Black communities. And what he finds, you know, he's going about this work, and what he finds is that his work is entirely funded by grants from white-led organizations. And he starts to see that over time, they begin to start having more and more demands on his work. And so, you know, like that they want him to focus on particular areas of study, or they at one point ask him or tell him that he needs to kind of partner with a local college and kind of go under their purview. And he just starts to notice more and more things like that, where they're kind of, that funnel's kind of starting to happen, where they're limiting, and what he's able to do with the funds that they gave him is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So Carter G. Woodson actually makes a huge, takes a huge risk and makes a huge decision that he is actually not gonna follow any of their restrictions anymore. He's just like, this is not what I intended to do. This is not why I got into this work, was not to, you know, report back on Black communities to these white-led organizations. That's not why I'm doing this. So in response, he loses all of his funding. The grants cut all of their funding. His organization has zero resources. And when he talks about this, and I'll forward the article to y'all later on so that you're able to look it over. But when he's talking about this, he says there was kind of a decision that had to be made at that point. Would he move forward and just go look for different grants from different folks? Because that was really one of the only ways they were doing fundraising in the 1930s was these big grants. Or would he do something new that he hadn't seen done before, but that he thought had a lot of potential, which was to raise money within his community? And that's what he ended up doing. He started taking donations and building campaigns to raise money within Black communities so that he was accountable to his community. And that's who he had to report back on. And he knew that they would not restrict his funding in the way that these white-led humongous nonprofits and foundations were trying to do. And so he almost immediately has incredible success with this and builds out his whole organization based on what we would now call like a community-centered fundraising model. And he really starts to build this analysis and saying, you know, that it's better to have $1 from 20,000 people than to have one person give you $20,000. Because if you lose that one person who gave you $20,000, your whole funding is gone. Whereas if you have 20,000 people, if you lose one person because your politic is getting too radical or they don't like the direction you're going, it's not going to hinder you, right? So that is kind of a really good example of Black folks, of BIPOC communities kind of having immediate response and analysis to the nonprofit industrial complex that was beginning to form almost 100 years ago. Yeah, so there are, many, many examples of this. And I think if you talk to folks in fundraising, that story about Carter G. Woodson could have happened literally yesterday. If someone walked up to me and they told me, oh yeah, my organization, we're really trying to hone in and center the Black Lives Matter movement and really reconstructing our work and really getting into this, and then we got all our funding pulled, I would say, oh, absolutely. I absolutely believe that. It's a very normal story in fundraising, and something that communities of color and social justice organizations have been having to deal with for a long time. And I'm sure there are many, many more examples that we could get into. But what I want to do right now is to actually break from me just yelling at the screen and go into some small breakout groups and just have folks be able to listen to some other voices. And I'll put this in the chat as well, but just to share your name, your pronouns, and either one reflection you have so far about what we're getting into around the nonprofit industrial complex, or maybe one experience you've had with it. If you like Carter G. Woodson, have had an experience where your organization has lost funding because your politics were getting too radical, or anything like that. Yeah, so I'll break us into our separate rooms, and then you'll get a reminder when it's time to come back to the group. And I think that we'll break for, I'm gonna say, I'm trying to do multiplication. I think we'll do around 8 to 10 minutes, but I'll send the reminder to you all. So just give me 1 second to set the
Lulu, I was wondering, can you write the question inside of the chat? And was it 8 minutes per person or 8 for the whole group?
8 for the whole group, yeah. And I'll pop it in the chat for sure. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good time in your breakout rooms. I would love if we could just have a couple folks unmute and share back.
Well, I'll share one thing that I learned in our group was about donor advised funds, and I had never heard of that. And so, just another way that people with lots of money use it, and the claim of using it for charitable purposes, but in reality just kind of use it for the tax write-off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was some new learning for me, so I appreciate Laura for sharing that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We could have a whole session on donor advised funds. And that's what I'm saying, y'all. We can go deep. Anyone else?
Aisha, I'll chime in. I was with Ashley and Alana, and we kind of similar line of thinking as to what Cynthia just mentioned. At the end, we were talking about organizations and this shift in thinking and decision making that's driven by donors and funders versus decision making that's driven by what the community actually needs. And starting to kind of see that pivot in some organizations that I'm engaged with outside of PV, and just kind of talking through that. But I think one other question I had for you is I hear, or I've seen kind of shifts in terminology between donors versus funders. And I'm wondering how you and how the group, see those two words. Are they interchangeable or do they mean different things? And I'm curious to hear from you or from anyone else about that.
Ooh, thanks, Vanessa. I'm telling you guys, there's spicy stuff here. I will say that for myself, I kind of use donor and funder interchangeably, but I also kind of connect, donors to what I think is kind of becoming a more outdated mode of fundraising, which is kind of a charity model of, you as a donor giving money to an organization because you want to help, like, let's just say if it was Powerful Voices, you want to help young girls of color. Whereas I think in general, we're trying to shift more towards not you helping the young people we work with, but you partnering with them to ensure their success and the success of our communities. So I think there's a little wiggle. I kind of do use them interchangeably, but I would love to hear if anyone else has a response to Vanessa or just something that came up in your breakout group. Yeah, and the question was, what's the difference between a funder and a donor? Is there a difference and how do we think about that? Cheryl, I would love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I interchange them too, but I think something that is a commonality for funders and for donors, or something that I work for Young Women Empowered that we're working towards with both our, I think funders, we look at them as more of our like corporate sponsors, and then donors as individual people. But something that we are trying to have as a commonality for both is that they switching the relationship from just being like us as the development person, like you have a relationship with me and you should fund this organization because like you're cool with me, but more of a relationship with the organization. And similar to what PV is doing, instead of like partnering or like showing up at the farm to like watch young people farm, that they're actually like volunteering to write thank you cards for me, or like they're showing up in different ways with the organization so that they're building a relationship in a way that doesn't feel exploitive to us. But also, brings them in a way that is authentic for them also. And so we're doing that with both, I think with donors or with individual donors, there's a lot of like, I see a lot of like hand holding and like catering to those folks. And with funders, I feel like that relationship isn't as personal. But for both, we're working towards this goal of them being more involved with the organization as opposed to, like catering to them, and or like them only funding certain, like because they like Victoria or something, So
I feel like that was so beautifully said, Cheryl. I love that. Yeah, that was amazing. And I also just I'm gonna pop in the chat a definition about donors advised funds. Donor advised funds are another place in development that I think can be a little tricky with the definition because it sounds so broad, but really a donor advised fund is a way, something that an organization, a charitable organization, can kind of hold the money that someone donates and then disperse it to an organization for them. There are different reasons that someone might do that, and we can get into that, you know, either via email or in a different session. But yes, like Erica's saying, it's another elaborate way that rich people, particularly rich white people, have constructed to keep their wealth and to not actually have to redistribute it. So we can get into it, it's very complicated, but I do want to keep us moving a little bit, just because we've had a little bit of time to talk about where we have been. And I want to go a little bit into where we are now. I think the past year especially has been a huge year for kind of this work of reimagining philanthropy and what it looks like in communities of color. And I think it's primarily been one, because many of us who work at nonprofits are not essential workers and have the privilege to work from home. And so we've had more time to, you know, and space to think about these things and kind of build our analysis. And also because nonprofits, as much as the sector would like to think so, do not exist in a vacuum and are constantly, you know, impacted by the world around us. And the past year has had a huge focus on, for a lot of us, a huge focus on building our social justice analysis. And I hope that we're all also bringing that into the work that we're doing. So the past year has been huge for kind of this idea of reimagining philanthropy. We saw the launch in Seattle of community-centric fundraising, which was a really dope org of different development professionals in Seattle kind of coming together to kind of promote this idea of a community-centered fundraising model. So similar to what G Woodson was doing in the 30s, but you know, kind of revitalized and new and very multifaceted. We've seen a lot of BIPOC fundraisers and developers kind of working on reconstructing this narrative in their own organizations. And it's been really, really amazing to see, because many of us support many different organizations and nonprofits who have amazing missions, amazing programs. But when you look at their fundraising model, it is not matching up to their mission. It's kind of painting, whether it be, you know, the women that they work with, young people that they work with, communities of color, disabled folks, queer folks. It kind of happens a lot in fundraising, where these different groups are kind of, and poor people, kind of looked at as disenfranchised and as charity cases. I mean, we've all seen so many images on flyers of like the quintessential like starving African child who, you know, we want to save, right? And that is really the exact opposite of what at Powerful Voices, what we're wanting to do. Like Cheryl was talking about at Why We, which is an amazing community organization that we love and partner with. What we're trying to do is not charity. We're trying to partner and reconstruct our communities in a way where BIPOC communities have the resources and the funding and the support that they need to thrive. So for me, when I'm talking about these things, it's about redistributing wealth, right? And it can get kind of tricky in that nonprofits can become kind of a scapegoat for rich white people, like we're talking about with donor advised funds or things like that, where they can think they're redistributing their wealth through nonprofits instead of through taxes, right? And so we also don't want to do that. And we also recognize that, you know, the work that we do in our organizations is only going to lead to real lasting change when it has an effect on the policies and the state that governs us. So we also have that analysis as well, but it is really important to us that we think of our donors, our funders, all of our supporters as part of like an ecosystem in our organization. So it's not just you're giving Powerful Voices $10 and you're a donor and you're giving us something, but rather we like to think of it as now we're partnering in something. So you brought this resource, we're bringing our expertise, we're bringing our staff who have the proper training and connections, and then we're together creating this space for the young people to thrive and to reach their potential, right? So that's kind of the switch that we're trying to make in our own fundraising, and something that we think is really important to be talking about with each other. And so kind of making the switch is not really easy, right? Like we have had to have lots of conversations about, who will we take sponsorships from? What does it look like if a corporation or an organization that has political values that are completely opposite to ours, what does it look like to receive funding from them? How do we remain accountable to our community, right? So these are continuing, conversations that we're really getting into, but we have kind of 3 guiding principles that I just wanted to share with y'all because, I just joined the staff in July. And so this is something Chimera and I, who had to step out, but is really excited that y'all are here, have been working on, and we're really excited to kind of start moving our organization to have complete alignment in our fundraising like we do in our programming with our mission. So we're kind of doing that through 3 ways right now. One is to be youth-centered in our fundraising. 2 is to be collaborative in our fundraising. And 3 is to promote change and action in our fundraising. So what that kind of looks like is just the process that we're doing to become mission aligned. So Powerful Voices mission, like Chimera said earlier, is to create spaces with Black and Brown young people, right? So what does it mean for us? If that's our mission, what does that mean for us in our fundraising? And this is where you'll start to see like some disalignment with different organizations, right? They have one mission, whether it be like to partner with and work with homeless folks, but then you go in their fundraising and I don't think any homeless or poor folks were consulted in the language that they use to talk about them, right? So how is that mission aligned? And why have we allowed ourselves to kind of, I don't know, just work into this like cookie cutter idea of fundraising instead of having specialized language that we use, right? So for Powerful Voices, what that's looked like is having youth involved in our campaigns and in our galas around the language that we use to talk about them, with them, and everything else. I had a great interaction with a young person last October for our annual luncheon because, I'm coming into the space, a development person, a fundraising person, communications, and I'm writing out all this language about what we're doing, how we're getting there. And I had this moment with an amazing young person in our program whose name is Kisan, where I've written all this stuff and she was like, Aisha. And I was like, oh, what? And she was like, what are you saying? And she was like, no, really, like, what are you saying? She was like, I'm seeing a lot of words that I don't understand the meaning. I don't understand what you're getting at. I don't get it. And I was like, I'm sure she says so many amazing things in a day that she like said it, and I'm sure she never thought about it again and went off with her life. But it's something that really did impact me because as someone who identifies as a youth worker, as someone who's in this amazing nonprofit, and we're doing this work with young people, what does it mean if our young people don't see themselves in the language that we're using? If they don't see themselves in the way that we're describing them in our fundraising, right? And it was a real wake-up call for me, and something that Chimera and I have really been thinking about ways to kind of counteract that. So one way has been just having youth in the room when we're having these conversations so that they can have moments like Kisan had to be like, no, this is not the way we're talking about ourselves, readjust. And also just being able to hear their voices in our campaigns. We have a campaign coming up next month, and it's been really important to us to gather quotes and ideas and thoughts from the young people in our programs, so that their voices are the ones that we're centering in all of our fundraising. Another way that we've been doing, that Powerful Voices has been doing for a while, is through collaboration, right? So I believe it was either 2017 or 2018 that we had our annual luncheon. And Powerful Voices did something that I've never seen before, and that I think is so, so cool, where we partnered with a number of smaller organizations as part of our fundraiser. And we kind of granted out mini grants to them of what we fundraised. So something that is super important to communities of color, something that's been part of Powerful Voices framework for a while, has been collaboration, right? As Black and Brown people, we have always turned towards each other and towards our communities to support each other when no one else would. And so that's something that's a super important piece of Powerful Voices, is to collaborate with other folks in our community. And then the last piece that we're kind of invigorating our fundraising around is change, social change and social action. I think this was an educator and activist, Erica Hart, who said this. She was talking about, the workshops and webinars that she does. And at the beginning of one, she was like, actually, I would love if people didn't take notes, because what happens is that you all leave these places with really woke notebooks, but your thoughts are not any different. Your notebook it's so immaculate. It has so many ideas. It has so many thoughts, but it's all theoretical. Your actions have not changed. Your thought process haven't changed. So just don't take notes. And that was hilarious and also really impacted me, because the goal of Reimagining Philanthropy, the goal of this work that we're doing, is not so that we all have this really cool insular language around social change and social justice in our fundraising. That's not the goal with this. The goal is that we are actually able to make change in the world around us, and that we're able to work together as individuals, as different organizations, as communities, to enact real and lasting social change for Black and Brown communities. That is the goal. So that's kind of where we're moving in our fundraising, and kind of what prompted us to have this space with y'all, is that we want to be mission aligned in our fundraising, and that consciousness raising and all of that work is a big part of that. Yeah, so I want to kind of pause there. And what I would like for us to do, since I just shared what kind of Powerful Voices has been doing, and we'll continue to change and evolve as time goes on, but kind of what we've been doing to reimagine philanthropy for us. And I think it would just be really cool and very fun if we kind of went around and just shared, because I know we have so many creative and innovative folks in here today. Share something that you would love to see change in philanthropy. There's a lot of work to be done. There are a lot of details that could be different. So what would you like to see different? It could be something really small. It could be something really big. But I'm also hoping that, in creating action and change, that we're also able to dream and envision what that looks like. So maybe we can just take 30 seconds, start thinking about it, and then we can popcorn style, just anyone who feels called to share just one hope or dream or one thing that you would love to see change about philanthropy.
Lulu. But actually, I won't speak unless I've always speak first. So if someone else would like to talk. Seems like nobody raised their hand. So this is Lulu, she, her pronouns. Turn up my volume so you can hear me. I was taking notes when you were taking notes. It's so hilarious, but it's because I'm a visual learner. So if I don't write it down, my brain doesn't understand what's being said. So I had to write notes. So the first thing I was thinking about was like, I've never done this before, but I appreciated the way that you started, because I'm like, I've always given to community, but I've never been the person that was in charge of the fundraiser. And then recently I just wrote these grants, and I got them, and then somebody was like, I never thought I would get, because I've written many grants before, but when I'm feeling the impact of other people and I stand on the shoulder of other people that have actually advocated within the Seattle community that funds should be given to people like me, and that we should trust. That was the one experience I have. The second experience was I was talking to a grant manager, and I was just it was like my friend just died, COVID-19 was happening, it was awful. And it still felt like this funder was making me show and prove. And I felt like a thief and a liar. And I was like, my internalized stuff kicked up where I was like, I literally bawled after this meeting because I was like, the reason why this hasn't been done is because my friend died. And the response, I think I still get emotional about it, was horrific. And so I really have a bad experience, like horrible. That was like one experience that will continue to stick with me. And I literally stood up for myself because that's what I know how to do, is like, use your words. I was like, you're treating me as if I'm stealing the money, and I'm trying to give you an alternative because I'm a verbal process. I can verbally tell you, what's been happening, even though I can't fill out the form in the way that your website was designed. And I'm very confused and I'm really rattled, and I wanted to just check in with you. So it was like this human connection, but they're kind of like, get the paperwork in. And I was like, I'm going to stop this conversation, and I can't have this conversation right now, and I will have it again with you later. What I'm thinking about is like, as I move into specific positions and I try to tell people that, well, I did get all these grants, so I'm pretty good at this. And I've realized, I've perfected this and I have no formal training. People are coming up and asking me for formal. I was like, I don't know. I'm just telling truth on paper and doing the best I can. But when I'm approaching a specific organization, they keep on using the old model you were talking about. And that's really hard for me. I'm like, I'm more of like emergent strategies, like Adrienne Marie Brown, like build it and they will come, and we can vision. And that's what I've been part of community efforts where we built something out of nothing. So it's hard to like, move out of that framework, because I'm like, we don't need your stinking money. But I was like, no, you have to change the way you think because you're in a different position of leadership now. So it's been hard because I'm like, I want to tell these funders off. And I actually did the other day too. I told a government agency that I'm like, just tell me what I'm mandatory to. I don't want the options. I already network with the community. I don't need your networking. I need your money, and you need it as a person. I need some skills in which to engage with you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Lulu. I'm just saying yes to all of that, and also not surprised but disappointed that you've had so many really terrible experiences with funders. Is there any
amazing experience too?
And some
in the pit, there's ones that were like, we're redirecting our funds to BIPOC folks because there's a lot of harm being done, and
a
lot of grant form.
Yes, I mean, Lulu, you better get those grants. Yes. Is there anyone else who would like to share?
This is Erica. I can share. Wow, there are so many things I want to see change about philanthropy. I think like one of my absolute greatest hopes that I don't know that I'll see in my lifetime, but I will continue working towards, is not having a need for philanthropy, to not have billionaires, to not have foundations, for all foundations to sunset. That is what I think all foundations' goals should be, is working themselves out of a job. I actually think that about basically the entire nonprofit sector, right? If we were actually able to realize all of our visions and we'd get rid of inequities, we wouldn't need nonprofits. And I think that's actually like one thing that can change in my lifetime, is like our mindset of actually trying to work ourselves out of jobs. Is like, a lot of people don't realize who work in the nonprofit sector, that we have a vested interest right now in not working ourselves out of jobs, right? Because we have jobs. This is how we make a living. But if we were able to make that shift in our own minds and say we should be trying to work ourselves out of a job, we should be trying to sunset all of these things, and then that would really, I think, help us get at looking at root causes a little bit more, and listening to and following the lead of people who are most directly affected. And I think that translates to the whole philanthropy and nonprofit sectors. So it's a big dream of mine.
Yeah. Oh, Erica, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That actually just came up at a PV staff meeting not too long ago, where we were like, we would really love to be out of a job. We would really love for there not to be a need for organizations to center specifically around Black and Brown girls, because they experience so much violence in their daily lives. My sincere hope is to work myself out of a job as quickly as possible. Yeah, so I just loved you mentioning that. And it kind of is connected to that dreaming and visioning piece. We were doing another exercise at a different staff thing where we were like, how do we know when our job is done? Like, how would powerful voices know? Like, how would we know as people, okay, finally, Black and brown girls have achieved liberation? What would that look like? How would we know it if we saw it? And it was a very challenging question, and it's like the ultimate journaling prompt for me. And I definitely do not have an answer for that. But I think, Erica, like what you're sharing just reminds me how important it is to think about and dream about those things so that we can get at those root causes like you're sharing. I would love to hear from one or two more folks.
I'll go. Mark Manzo, he, him. Earlier, you were talking about being interested in donors who would partner with you and get more hands-on and more involved. And I think that's great, but I see a flip side of that too, is that, you know, as we all know, a lot of donors come from a place of privilege. I don't know if I necessarily want their input on everything, because I have a lot of trust in my program people who, you know, work with communities of color or communities that have typically been disenfranchised. They're doing the good work. I know that donors usually come from a good place, but I don't know if they always get it. So for me, I'm always kind of a little leery of the idea of partnering with my donors. I kind of want them to just trust us to do the work. And if they want to learn more, that's always available to them. So that was just my quick thought on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I think just speaking specifically about powerful voices and our model, that is definitely something we have been trying to find a balance. And because like you're saying, we definitely do have these, you know, major donors who are coming from very, very affluent backgrounds. That's not who we're trying to center in our programming. Is not who we're trying to center in our fundraising. Like I said, we want to center young people. And so I think that model of partnership has an kind of an equity lens for me, at least, of when we're talking about partnering and centering. When I'm saying it, I'm not meaning to center rich white people in our fundraising. That's not what partnership doesn't look the same for everyone in our fundraising model. And yeah, I just love that you brought that up, because it is so important. And you do see at times, like Cheryl even mentioned earlier, I think this is another piece kind of connected to what you're talking about. When Cheryl said that in a lot of nonprofits, you see kind of this hand holding happening with donors. And I've seen that happen at many organizations, primarily with these people who come from super privileged backgrounds and think they should be centered, because they have been, who think they should be centered in our fundraising and in the work we do, and really want to have like their hand held by the executive director or something like that through the process. So I do think it's super important to think about who we're centering in our fundraising and what what partnership looks like with them, for sure. So thank you for bringing that up. And I love your mask, not related, I just like it. Can we get one more person to kind of round us out?
Aisha, I can go. My name's Mary Batterson. I'm showing up as Mary B. I need to go in and change my name. My pronouns are she, her. I work with corporate fundraisers, and so I understand the importance of storytelling. I mean, you want to tell compelling stories to encourage other people to join your mission, join the work that you're trying to do. But what I see with a lot of corporations is, rather than give the money and then tell the story, they're sort of crafting the stories themselves. And I talked about this a little bit in the breakout room. They decide the story that they want to tell, and then they might come to us and say, well, can you provide us a story of this person in this age range with this ethnic background that we can get photos of, and they will give us quotes for our newsletter. And like I said, I understand the importance of compelling storytelling, but to go in with such a crafted, like pre-crafted story, is that really being true to what you want to do with your funding to help somebody rise?
Wow, Mary, that is it. I feel like you just got something super big there. And I think even if we look carefully at the way that some grant questions are structured, you can see that they're clearly leading you to respond in a certain way. So I love that piece of what you're saying, Mary, about our funders are coming to us already with an idea of what they want. They're not coming to hear authentically what we have, but they're coming to us hoping that we'll fulfill a need for them. I feel like I could go into that for literal hours, but I love that you brought that up. Yeah, wow. I'm ready to have a full, session about that. But thank you all so much for coming and sharing. I think it's just super great to hear from you all. And like I said, we're hoping, as this series continues for it to be just more and more collaborative and more about us coming together as individuals and as communities. And with the knowledge that Powerful Voices, our mission and our goal is creating space. And that does not mean that we have the answers. It just means that our focus is creating the space for answers to emerge. So I really loved having this conversation with you all. And I just wanted to give a couple kind of ending pieces of that I will be following up right after this with a survey. And it's super, super helpful to us for you just to let us know any other thoughts or ideas that you had that come up after the session. And then if you don't get to it today, I'll send a reminder on Monday. I have been a youth worker in the past, so following up is the name of the game, and I will bug you almost. But this has been so, so great. The recording will be sent out on Monday. And then our next session, we're planning just for our capacity, because I'm currently the only development staff at Powerful Voices. So, my capacity is only so much. So we're planning for these to be happening on a quarterly basis. And the next one that happens in May, I'm super excited about because we're going to have a panel of BIPOC fundraisers and development folks. I've already started reaching out to them. We are gonna have some really, really amazing people. And I know that our numbers and our community will continue to grow as time does. So thank you all so much for coming and for making space for us on a Saturday. It's gonna be, oh goodness, and I know I'll mess up the date, so let me put that in the email, but it'll be towards the end of May. Thank you all so much for coming. Please email me with any questions, ideas. I love connecting with folks, and it's been so phenomenal just to talk with you all about these things that are coming up. Yeah, it was good to see you all.